John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, emerged as a young and charismatic leader who offered Americans a vision of renewal and optimism. He spoke of a new generation stepping forward, passing the torch to those born in a new century. Kennedy represented a modern politician for a modern America, famously urging citizens not to ask what their country could do for them, but what they could do for their country. Yet, despite this hopeful image, Kennedy's life is often remembered more for its tragic ending than its promise. On that November day in 1963, as the presidential motorcade moved forward with a Secret Service vehicle close behind, the unthinkable occurred. The President of the United States was dead. His assassination became a defining moment in American history, marking a symbolic shift from an era of innocence to one shaped by violence, uncertainty, and profound change. In death, Kennedy was transformed from a man into a legend. As a leader, Kennedy was intelligent, strikingly photogenic, and refreshingly honest, qualities that made him stand out in the political world. He brought a new energy to public life, creating an image unlike any other Western democratic leader before him. He appealed especially to the young, reinventing what it meant to be a politician and pioneering a new, media-driven style of politics. This transformation was nothing short of revolutionary. However, this polished historical image often conceals the complex and contradictory man behind the myth. As a student, Jack Kennedy did not excel academically. Though clearly intelligent, he struggled to apply himself and barely managed respectable grades. His childhood was marked by constant illness, so severe that it is remarkable he survived into adulthood. Many assume that Kennedy's exposure to world events before World War II was coincidental, that his travels to Berlin in 1939, Palestine, and Indochina were accidental encounters with history. In truth, his personal diaries reveal that these experiences deeply fascinated him and fueled his interest in politics. He possessed a genuine curiosity about the world and its conflicts. Kennedy projected an enduring sense of hope, admiration, and optimism that deeply resonated with people. While millions recognized him, very few truly knew him. His personality continues to intrigue generations, and his life story reflects the careful construction of a president. Born on May 29, 1917, in Massachusetts, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, known to family and friends as Jack, was the second son of Joseph Kennedy, a wealthy investor and political figure. He grew up in a Boston Irish family that, despite its later influence, initially lacked strong political ambitions. His father worked in banking, while his mother came from a politically active Democratic family. Her father, John "Honey" Fitzgerald, had served multiple terms in Congress and as mayor of Boston, leaving a lasting political legacy that strengthened the Kennedy name in Massachusetts. The Kennedy family lived a privileged life, with grand homes in Hyannisport, Cape Cod, and Palm Beach, Florida. Jack's upbringing was filled with elite prep schools, luxury, and social insulation, far removed from the everyday experiences of most Americans. In many ways, his childhood resembled that of a European aristocrat. Kennedy's secondary education began at a Catholic school, but he soon became unhappy there and was transferred to Choate, an exclusive preparatory school in Connecticut, following his older brother. Despite Choate later being associated with the inspiration for his famous inaugural speech, Jack found little happiness there. His brother Joe Jr. thrived, excelling academically and athletically, while Jack struggled to keep pace. Although intelligent and charming, Jack was undisciplined and uninterested in competing with his brother. He read history and biographies but lacked motivation, graduating near the middle of his class. Compared to figures like Richard Nixon, his academic record was unimpressive. He resisted Choate's strict discipline and even formed a rebellious group known as the Muckers Club, dedicated to breaking school rules. Though he narrowly avoided expulsion thanks to his father's intervention, Jack was required to meet with a psychologist. When asked why he failed to apply himself, he replied candidly that his brother already succeeded so well that he felt no need to do the same. Despite the advantages of his upbringing, Kennedy's childhood was dominated by serious health problems. Long periods of bed rest, heavy medication, and repeated hospitalizations became a defining pattern of his life. As a child, he suffered severe scarlet fever during a major outbreak in Boston, requiring family influence to secure treatment at the city's best hospital. Illness followed him constantly. Pneumonia, asthma, undiagnosed conditions, and chronic pain plagued his youth. He also suffered from significant spinal issues caused by uneven leg length, a condition that led to lifelong back problems. These physical struggles shaped not only his resilience but the man he would become. What is remarkable is that he wanted to enjoy the level of health that others took for granted. He developed a jokey kind of heroism, coping with what most people would consider life-threatening illnesses, yet refusing to take them seriously. It is interesting to consider how his severe health problems shaped his mentality. What they left him with was a strong live-for-the-moment attitude. There was a part of Kennedy that believed he might not be around for long, so he resolved to enjoy himself as much as possible while he could. There were underappreciated depths to the younger Kennedy that many people overlooked. During frequent periods of illness, he turned to reading, developing his mind and imagination through the works of Robert Louis Stevenson, Winston Churchill, and others. Although he was academically just getting by, his self-education proved invaluable. As Jack and his brother matured, their father deliberately fostered a rivalry between them, something the businessman Joe Kennedy Sr. clearly thrived on. The Kennedys were expected to excel at everything: sports, academics, debating, writing, and literature. In effect, the family was being turned into a brand, carefully groomed for success. Their father held extraordinarily high expectations and placed them under immense pressure. Alongside this, there was also a degree of sexual competition within the household. Both of the two older boys were extremely handsome and frequently brought home girlfriends. Their father openly flirted with these women and even propositioned them. He was not merely a womanizer of spectacular proportions. He was completely open about it. His sons were fully aware of his behavior. The advice he reportedly gave them was that they needed to have sex as often as possible. His affairs were no secret, and this attitude was clearly passed down to his sons, including John Kennedy. On the positive side, Joe Kennedy took an intense interest in all of his children. In that sense, he was a good father, especially for his generation. Among elite American and British families of the time, fathers often neglected their children, sending them away to boarding schools for years and taking little interest in their lives. Joe Kennedy, by contrast, involved himself aggressively in his children's upbringing. Jack completed his studies at Choate, and although his grades were unremarkable, he still gained admission to Harvard. It was during the summer that followed, coinciding with his father's appointment as ambassador to Britain, that Jack Kennedy's real education began. He embarked on several trips to Europe during the 1930s, and the political tensions and shifting power structures deeply fascinated him. He witnessed some of the 20th century's most significant events firsthand, experiences that would shape his future in ways he could not yet imagine. Jack Kennedy's first trip to Europe took place in 1937. He traveled with a school friend, Lem Billings, sailing from the United States and bringing along Jack's sports car. They spent 10 weeks driving across the continent. The following year, after Joe Kennedy Sr. was appointed U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom by President Roosevelt, Jack returned to Europe. This time, the trip was not purely for pleasure. He worked at the embassy in London, where he gained his first exposure to the inner workings of politics and the realities of international diplomacy. This was an extraordinary education. His father not only had a front-row seat to European politics but also occupied a unique position in relation to British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain. Joe Kennedy stood at the very center of European events in the late 1930s and played a major role on that stage. During this period, Jack became fascinated by Britain's rearmament and the growing rise of fascism on the continent. These experiences gave him deep insight into Hitler, the nature of fascism, and the power of charisma. It was also a powerful lesson in propaganda. Unlike later historians, Jack saw firsthand that the Nazi regime was driven almost entirely by propaganda, executed at a level of brilliance rarely seen before in history. The following year, Jack traveled to Europe for a third time, though this journey took him beyond London. He visited the Middle East, the Soviet Union, and the Balkans while researching his final year thesis. He later traveled to Czechoslovakia and Germany, witnessing a Europe on the brink of war. He left Berlin on September 1, 1939, the very day Germany invaded Poland. This trip had a lasting influence on him. Kennedy firmly believed in the importance of being present and seeing events unfold firsthand. He had a deep interest in political history and wanted to experience it directly. Realizing that Europe stood on the verge of catastrophe, he sought to educate himself about global affairs in the most practical way possible, by traveling and observing. Kennedy had great faith in his own judgment and perception, and being physically present on the ground became a recurring theme throughout his political career. With little more than his passport and a letter from his father, the U.S. ambassador to Britain, He was able to move freely through countries at the center of world events. After returning home, Jack began writing his dissertation. With his father's support, the work went beyond the confines of a typical Harvard study. Its central argument examined how slowly Britain had recognized the threat posed by Germany. His professors praised the work, noting how unusual it was for a student to have such extensive first-hand experience. The dissertation was shown to Arthur Kroc of the New York Times, a friend of Jack's father, who immediately recognized its potential and suggested it could become a book. In the summer of 1940, John Kennedy's first book, Why England Slept, was published. By the spring of 1941, it had sold roughly 880,000 copies in the United States and Britain, though rumors persisted that his father had purchased 30,000 copies and stored them at the family home in Hyannisport. For the United States, still officially neutral, the book served as something of a wake-up call as events unfolded in Europe. It established a crucial part of Kennedy's public image, that of a man of letters and a serious intellectual who published books. More importantly, it laid the foundation for his foreign policy thinking. To understand Kennedy's views on foreign policy during the Cold War and his presidency, one can still learn much by reading Why England Slept. For Jack, the book marked a turning point in his life. Until then, he had lived in the shadow of his more capable older brother. The attack on Pearl Harbor transformed the war into a global crisis, and the Kennedy family was not immune to its effects. Joe Kennedy Sr.'s political career became the first casualty. As ambassador, he increasingly saw himself as a potential peacemaker for Europe, believing he could negotiate a deal. Joseph Kennedy believed he could bring the British Prime Minister and the Führer together at one table and somehow resolve the crisis through negotiation. He was convinced that everything could be fixed. But he had badly misjudged Hitler, and as it became clear that Britain was standing alone, Kennedy lost faith in the country. He approached politics with a businessman's mindset, believing that problems could be solved with deals and payments. He failed to understand Hitler's ideology, rooted in blood, soil, and mysticism. This attitude quickly became deeply controversial and unpopular among the British public, turning him into an embarrassment. As a result, by 1941, Joseph Kennedy's political career was effectively finished. Even during John F. Kennedy's later political campaigns, although Joseph remained influential behind the scenes, he was rarely seen in public. The President of the United States no longer relied on his ambassador to London, believing that Joseph Kennedy was wrong, just as he believed Neville Chamberlain had been wrong. The President instead felt that Winston Churchill was the one leader capable of standing up to Hitler. This shift left Joseph Kennedy isolated and sidelined. Despite ongoing health problems, Jack Kennedy was eager to join the U.S. Armed Forces. By securing a doctor's certificate, he managed to enroll in the Navy just before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Hungry for action, he was disappointed when his medical condition confined him to desk duty in Washington, where he worked in naval intelligence. During this period, Jack met the first, and arguably greatest, love of his life. At Harvard, he became involved with Inger Arvad, a beautiful Danish journalist 7 years older than him. This was one of the rare times in his life when he was deeply emotionally engaged. The attraction was partly physical. She was strikingly beautiful, but also intellectual. She was worldly, politically connected, and admired wherever she went. Jack was drawn to her European background, his own experiences abroad allowing him to connect with her perspective. He was fascinated by her political insight, especially the fact that she had interviewed both Hitler and Göring before leaving Europe, which made her extraordinary in his eyes. However, Inger Arvad's past raised serious concerns. Hitler himself had admired her, calling her the ideal Aryan woman. In Washington, she was viewed as a potential Mata Hari figure. Her connections to Hitler and the Nazi elite made her a subject of FBI surveillance, and her private conversations and relationship with Jack were closely monitored. Almost no one approved of the affair. Jack's family considered her unsuitable as a future wife. She was not Catholic and had been divorced twice. His superiors in naval intelligence were equally alarmed, worried that a young intelligence officer was romantically involved with a woman who might be a foreign spy. Jack was passionately in love and told his father he intended to marry her. Joseph Kennedy firmly refused. Eventually, he confronted Inger directly, warning her that she would never marry his son and that continuing the relationship could lead to serious consequences. That conversation effectively ended the affair. Jack later admitted to an interviewer that she had been the love of his life, but it was never meant to be. Although Joseph Kennedy initially opposed his son's participation in naval combat, he eventually helped make it possible. Jack became the captain of a patrol torpedo boat, small, fast vessels designed for combat. While it is unclear whether guilt over ending the relationship with Inger influenced Joseph's decision, he did ensure that Jack's boat was usually kept away from dangerous waters. That changed during heightened Japanese aggression near the Solomon Islands. Jack's boat eventually came under attack, and the war brought bittersweet consequences for the Kennedy family. While tragedy struck in Europe, honor and recognition followed at home. On the night of August 1, 1943, while conducting routine patrols alongside two other PT boats, Jack spotted an enemy ship. Before he could react, his vessel was rammed by a Japanese destroyer and cut in half. It was the middle of the night, with no proper radar and limited visibility. The collision was devastating. Some crew members were killed instantly, while others were thrown into the water. Jack acted heroically. Despite severe back problems and chronic health issues, he swam for hours, rescuing surviving crew members. Using a belt clenched in his teeth, he towed one injured sailor more than 3 miles to shore. After 5 exhausting hours in the water, he succeeded in bringing his men to safety. 9 crew members survived and reached a remote, deserted island, where they remained stranded until Jack arranged for a local islander to carry a coconut carved with a message stating that they were alive. Rescue finally arrived soon afterward. Throughout his life, Jack had lived in the shadow of his older brother, Joe Jr., who had always outperformed him academically. Their relationship was shaped by competition, and Joe Jr. may have felt increasing pressure to prove himself. Having already gone beyond expectations, and perhaps influenced by the heroism of his younger brother, Joe Jr. may have been driven by an even stronger sense of duty and service. Joe Kennedy Jr. volunteered for an extraordinarily dangerous mission to bomb a German airbase in Belgium. No one was ever forced to take part in such an operation, as the likelihood of death was extremely high. In effect, he became an American kamikaze. Bombers were packed with explosives and sent to destroy V-rocket facilities in occupied Europe. The mission failed when the explosives detonated before the aircraft reached its target. Joe Kennedy Jr. was still on board and was killed instantly. For the Kennedy family, this was a devastating tragedy. While Jack Kennedy was still grieving his brother's death, news began spreading about his own heroism in the Pacific. A writer from Life magazine, John Hersey, approached Kennedy about writing an article for The New Yorker. Joseph Kennedy Sr., working quietly behind the scenes, ensured the piece was republished in Reader's Digest. As a result, millions of Americans in 1944 read a vivid account of John Kennedy's bravery during World War II. By the early 1940s, Kennedy already had a reputation as an intellectual, a man of letters with cultural sophistication. His wartime service added a second powerful dimension to his public image, that of a war hero. Together, these elements created the idea of a leader who possessed both intelligence and courage. Some later speculated that Joe Jr.'s death alone pushed JFK into politics, but that view is incorrect. FBI records show that Kennedy had been discussing a political career, even the presidency, as early as the time of Pearl Harbor. While his older brother may have stood in the way, his death cleared the path for JFK to take up the family mantle, with his father willing to finance the effort. After the PT boat incident, Jack suffered chronic back pain and was honorably discharged from the Navy. With his brother dead and his father's political ambitions finished, he worked briefly as a journalist, though uncertainty about his future remained. Eventually, it was decided that he would run for Congress in 1946, once again with Joe Kennedy Sr. playing a decisive role. His father helped secure the congressional run by persuading a local Democratic congressman to vacate his seat and run for mayor of Boston instead. Victory was not guaranteed, as Kennedy lacked deep community roots. To compensate, the family invested heavily in building political connections. Joe Kennedy Sr. spent enormous sums, far beyond the typical $25,000 campaign budget, possibly as much as $500,000. John Kennedy understood the power of political imagery, an area in which his father was highly skilled. Together, they helped transform American campaigning. Advertising agencies were hired to manage media relations, refine speeches, and design visual messaging. 90 billboards were placed across Boston, creating an exceptionally polished campaign. Despite serious health issues, Kennedy projected a confident and appealing image. On camera, he appeared youthful, modest, intelligent, compassionate, and attractive, qualities that resonated as genuine. The strategy worked, and in November 1946, he won the congressional seat. Soon, however, he realized that life in Congress was not what he had imagined. As a congressman, Kennedy was not particularly diligent. He partied frequently, was often ill, and missed many sessions. While defending working-class Bostonians was honorable, he found the work dull. What truly interested him were global affairs, the great questions of war, peace, and the struggle between communism and democracy. After 6 years in the House, he set his sights on the Senate. Though young and facing strong opposition in Massachusetts, he decided to run in 1952 against Henry Cabot Lodge. His campaign was modern and highly professional, and his Cold War views were even more hardline than Lodge's. This stance attracted voters from both parties. The Kennedy family recognized that John was a star. His Senate campaign emphasized personal charm and physical appeal, portraying him as both a sex symbol and a symbol of family values. One of the most famous campaign tactics involved tea parties hosted by his mother and sisters, attended by an estimated 70,000 women, roughly the margin by which he defeated Lodge. Kennedy came to symbolize family life more than almost any other American politician, representing a political dynasty. His image was carefully refined: scholar, war hero, and family man. Older women wanted to nurture him, younger women were drawn to him romantically. However, his reputation as a playboy soon became a liability. When Kennedy entered the Senate in 1953, he was still unmarried. Media attention focused heavily on his bachelor status, including articles labeling him the Senate's gay young bachelor. Around this time, he had already met Jacqueline Bouvier. Their relationship attracted significant media interest and enhanced his public image. Jackie Kennedy brought intelligence, poise, and glamour. Both she and Jack shared difficult family backgrounds, creating a sense of mutual understanding. While Jack valued his romantic freedom, his father believed marriage was essential for any future presidential ambitions. Jackie fit perfectly into the role of a political wife for a prominent Catholic politician. They married on September 12, 1953, in Newport, Rhode Island. Although the marriage was troubled from the beginning, both understood the importance of projecting an image of stability and happiness. Jackie's presence proved invaluable to Jack's career, even as both engaged in extramarital affairs. By the mid-1950s, the Kennedy brand was firmly established. The 1956 Democratic Convention brought JFK national attention, particularly through his televised speech. Though he narrowly missed becoming the vice presidential nominee, the event demonstrated his powerful connection with television audiences. On January 2, 1960, Kennedy announced his presidential campaign. He faced Vice President Richard Nixon in what would become one of the closest elections in history. Kennedy's Catholic faith posed a major obstacle, as no Catholic had ever been elected president. Many Americans feared divided loyalties. Kennedy confronted the issue directly in a landmark speech to Protestant ministers in Houston, declaring that he was not a Catholic candidate for president, but a Democratic candidate who happened to be Catholic. This moment reshaped religious discourse in American politics. The decisive turning point came with the televised presidential debates. Though physically unwell, Kennedy appeared youthful, confident, and polished on screen, while Nixon appeared tired and uncomfortable. Television viewers overwhelmingly believed Kennedy won, proving the power of visual image in modern politics. Kennedy surged ahead in the polls and went on to win the presidency. Celebrations marked his victory, but for Kennedy himself, this triumph marked the beginning of a far more complex chapter. Though young and charismatic, his rise was carefully engineered, largely through image. In doing so, John F. Kennedy became the model for the modern, media-driven presidency.